Welcome back to the channel, Greg Allen F1. As you can see, I have officially moved. It took 3 weeks to do this, which is why I have not been posting videos consistently. But moving forward, I should be able to get videos up on a more frequent basis. It's not just a move, to be honest with you. My work has been very busy. That final push to Christmas and New Year's as well. But with that said, the Formula 1 2020 season is now in the books. Didn't get a chance to do my review of the final Grand Prix. You didn't really miss much if you didn't catch my review and you did watch the race. Bit of a snooze fest to close out the year, but kind of fitting because that was many of the Grand Prix in 2020. It was either an extremely exciting race or an extremely boring race. Didn't seem like we had any just middle-of-the-road races all year long. But I want to close out the 2020 year with my final power rankings of all 21 drivers that are going to make it. And explaining that, you had to have at least raced in 2 Grand Prix for you to make my list here, and I did that, of course, to put Nico Hulkenberg on the list. So without further ado, let's get into my 2020 final power rankings of the season, and let's find out who's number 1 and who's number 21, which is where we're going to start. Coming in 21st for me, Nicholas Latifi. Just not the year that he wanted in the Williams. A very, very rough year. Gets out qualified by his teammate, George Russell, in every single Grand Prix. Not a stat that you really want to have. Moving forward, so many weekends, he would just be 20th on the grid to start, and things just didn't get much better. Best finish of the year, 11th, which he did 3 times. Very, very close, but he is the only driver in F1 that raced more than one race that did not get points this year. Not a great stat that you want. George Russell would have been there with him. Let's not make up anything about that. If George Russell was not in a Mercedes for one race, he would have probably not finished with any points. But either way, that leaves Latifi as the only driver not scoring points at all. And in fact, he finishes way behind a couple drivers, only raced a few races. So, not a good year for him. 0 points, best finish of 11th. 3 retirements actually is a positive for him. You would feel that with the stats lines that he has, it would have been more retirements than what he had. Only 3 times he doesn't finish a Grand Prix. But either way, not the best year for Nicholas Latifi. And he'll be looking to improve that in the Williams next year, because if he doesn't, it's going to be kind of hard to imagine that Canadian still being in a car moving forward after this, regardless of whatever backing he might have. So Nicholas Latifi, number 21. All right, coming in 20th for me, Kevin Magnussen. Hate to see him go. I do like Haas a lot. Being here in North Carolina, pretty close to their team headquarters, I always pull for the Haas team and the American team to do well. Kevin Magnussen, I feel like he really could have been a good driver had he been in a different situation and not stuck in Haas. No disrespect to Haas, I think that they're going to be okay long term. 4 or 5 years down the road, they might be a solid mid-road team. Kevin Magnussen was just there at the wrong time and was at the wrong team at the wrong time in his racing career. Hate to see him go. Wish him the best of luck. I believe he's driving sports cars next year. So good luck to Kevin Magnussen. This season only has the 1 point for one race. It could have been a 9th place finish. They wound up getting a team penalty for what was deemed an illegal pit stop, boxing during the formation lap. So he wanted getting pushed back to 10th. Cost him a couple of points there. Cost the team a couple of points. That wound up being his best finish. His biggest issue this year was retirements, though. Kevin Magnussen had a ridiculous 6 retirements. He couldn't stay on the track. And when you're not running a full schedule, 6 retirements is way, way too many for you to be anywhere in the conversation. Not the year he wants to go out on, but it could be worse, as we'll talk about in my next driver. Coming in 19th for me, Romain Grosjean. No matter what you want to talk about the stats here with this guy, the only thing that matters in the end is that Romain Grosjean is okay, safe, and home with his family, his wife and kids. Obviously, one of the biggest stories of the season was his crash. Never seen anything like that. Hope I never see anything like it again. On the track, Romain Grosjean has 1 race where he finishes in the points. He does wind up pulling off a 9th place finish, so he pulls ahead of Kevin Magnussen and his teammate in that sense. Grosjean had an okay season. He winds up having 3 retirements, more than he'd like. Doesn't get to finish out the Formula 1 season and his Formula 1 career, which is really sad. Both these Haas drivers won't be with us next year. Romain Grosjean came under criticism in the beginning of the year again for a lot of the way he was driving. I know Carlos Sainz had some major issues with the way he blocked early on in a Grand Prix. I was very critical of him early on. I felt like Haas needed to make a move. Regardless of what happened with his accident there, if we're being honest here, it was time to move on from these 2 drivers. I felt like Kevin Magnussen should have stayed, and they should replace just Grosjean. If I'm being very honest, I know after something, like an accident like you went through happens, you want to backpedal. But if I'm being very honest, I thought Romain Grosjean's time in Formula One was probably up. All that said, he had a fantastic career, in racing in general, especially in Formula One. By Formula One standards, was it fantastic? No, but he got to drive a long and extended career in F1, which is something most race car drivers can never say. So for that alone, he had his moments in F1, and I think that's a successful racing career. He got to race in F1 for a long time. I do hope we see him in a Formula One car again for at least a test. I know Mercedes said they might give him one. No one should have to end their racing career in a ball of flame like he did. So hopefully we'll get to see him on track again next year at some point in 2021. Either way, best of luck to Romain Grosjean, whatever he does in his next career. That said, for Formula One power rankings, he does come in at 19th. All right, coming in 18th for me, and that's Giovinazzi and Alfa Romeo. Not a good year again for Alfa Romeo. Haas, Alfa Romeo, and Ferrari all had the Ferrari power units. I've talked about it a ton of times in my videos. Just very slow power units this year. Doesn't help Alfa Romeo out at all. Giovinazzi, they kept talking about him having those good starts, and for most Grand Prix this year, he did make up positions. That doesn't really mean anything to me that much unless you're in a good car and can hold on to those positions. And he didn't really do a lot to impress me this year, and for his age, I feel like he should be better than he is. And I don't need to be overly critical, but his best finish of the year is 9th. He has 3 retirements. Stat-wise, he almost mimics exactly what his teammate Kimi Räikkönen does, except that Kimi Räikkönen looked more impressive on track because he's Kimi Räikkönen. I want to see a little more from Giovinazzi. He'll be back next year, and in fairness to him, I don't think he did anything that deserved him losing his ride, per se, but I would say if there's not some level of improvement next year, I'd like to see Alfa Romeo look outside for someone different, because I don't know it's going to get much better if he's already 27, 28. But in fairness to him, let's see him in a little bit faster, more competitive race car. I feel like Alfa Romeo might as well not have been on the track at all this year. They were hardly noticeable, except for when Kimi Räikkönen was either doing godly things with his car in the first lap to pass 10 cars, or if he was showing a safety worker how to use a fire extinguisher. Other than that, I can't really remember Alfa Romeo on the track at all this year. They were pretty forgettable. And with that said, Kimi Räikkönen will come in at 17th. I love Kimi Räikkönen. I've done a video about how I'm so happy that he's still in Formula One. Kimi's one of my favorite personalities in F1. He's exactly what a race car driver should be, and he's still one of the best on the grid. Like I said, I did a video on this channel about why he's not too old for F1. You put him in a Ferrari, that's a bad example this year. You put him in a Mercedes or a Red Bull, or even a Racing Point, and Kimi Räikkönen's battling for podiums and wins every single week, in my opinion. One of the best drivers out there. He's not too old for the sport, a sport that's getting older now with Alonso coming back in, which will be interesting. Kimi Räikkönen, though, has pretty not great stats. He's in that 15th to 10th place almost weekly. He does finish in the points a few times. He has I'm looking at my notes real quick, 9th place finish was his best finish twice. And more importantly, he only has a 1 retirement in the first Grand Prix of the year. So Kimi Räikkönen still putting up pretty decent stats. Just the Alfa Romeo is too slow. It's not good enough for him. Valuable to have that kind of driver in your team, but eventually these Ferrari power units and Haas and Alfa Romeo really need to pick it up next year, which is going to be tough for them to do. So we'll see what they do. All right, coming in 16th, Dan Kvyat. Or Kvyat, depending on how you want to pronounce it today. I always love that with the broadcasts. We can't make up our minds on how we want to pronounce his name. I will say, just not good enough, right? So at the beginning of his year was just not good enough, and he really showed us a lot towards the end of the year. AlphaTauri in general, I thought really had a solid end of the year with Kvyat more than they did with Gasly. Overall, they were super impressive this year. But Kvyat winds up having a really good best finish of 4th. He finishes on 32 points, 1 retirement. It's not a bad year. It certainly isn't a bad year, but with the lineup and the drivers coming through the Red Bull Academy, and even if you don't go that route, I think that Albon has probably a better move if that was the direction they want to go in. You always kind of felt by midway through this season that Kvyat was not going to be in that car next year. If he had reversed his season and had the end of the year be the beginning of his year, I'm not so sure he doesn't hold on to that ride. But unfortunately, it's not the way it worked out for him, and he will be moving on to something different than Formula One next year, as so many drivers on this side of the board were saying that about. So he is the third driver on this side of the board, and I'm betting probably one of 5 drivers, maybe even 6 drivers on this side of the board that might not be in Formula 1 in 2022. So something to watch, but Kvyat does lose his ride. We have a young hotshot coming in to replace him, so that'll be interesting to see what happens. And unfortunately, he might not be the last driver on this list that we might not see in 2022. All right, coming in way down in 15th. Who could have imagined it going into the 2020 season that we would have Sebastian Vettel all the way down there in a Ferrari? One of the biggest stories prior to the season getting going was Sebastian Vettel being told that his services were no longer wanted at Ferrari, and that just ignited not only a crazy, silly season with drivers moving everywhere, but one of the most dramatic stories of the year was Sebastian Vettel's divorce from Ferrari. It created chaos in the beginning of the season for him and for Ferrari. It created definitely some inter-team issues with strategy in the beginning of the season. It did settle down by the end of the year, in fairness to Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari. If it was like that all year long, I think that it would have been a different story. Unfortunately, that decision came so close to the beginning of the start of a delayed season that I think it really created chaos in that team. He finishes with 33 points, which is horrendous for him. Best finish of the year, 3rd, which is a miracle that he made it onto the podium this year. He ran a fantastic race in that one to do that, I will say. And he only winds up with 2 retirements, so it's nothing crazy bad in that atmosphere. Overall, though, just Ferrari was bad, and Sebastian Vettel didn't really have that drive to make him much better like his teammate did. Because why not? He's a lame duck driver who's leaving, and I don't, he's not someone who was battling for a ride. He was always going to get a ride next year. He's multiple-time champion in Formula 1, has won everything he can, but he didn't get it done at Ferrari, so they decided to move on without him. And he decides to really kind of phone it in for the majority of this season. I don't think it's unfair to say that. I felt that there were times Sebastian Vettel could not care less about being on that racetrack in that car. I think that you're going to see a very rejuvenated and aggressive Sebastian Vettel next year, and I'm looking forward to seeing that, even if I'm maybe not a huge fan of how things played out and the way the drivers moved, specifically with him taking over a seat from Checo. But that said, Sebastian Vettel, 15th, a year he'll want to forget, and likely will very quickly if he hasn't already. Coming in at 14th with 10 points on the season, hashtag Hulkenberg, one of the biggest stories of the year, of course, Nico Hulkenberg getting 3 Grand Prix weekends in the 2020 season when he had lost his ride coming into this season, and in a lot of ways he has his best season in Formula 1. He looked fantastic. The Racing Point cars were super fast. He gets 2 back-to-back weeks taking over for Checo, who unfortunately was diagnosed with COVID and had to miss back-to-back weeks. Something crazy happens where he doesn't get to start the first race, which was really unfortunate. But he comes back. Best finish is 7th. Follows that up with an 8th, replacing Lance Stroll later in the year. So for a driver who got 3 Grand Prix weekends, 2 Grand Prix under his belt, Hulkenberg had a fantastic season. And so much so that people were really talking about Hulkenberg getting a ride next year and how he should. And he made his way onto the short list, or maybe the longer list, for possible taking over the seat at Red Bull that Alex Albon might be vacating. We don't know. We'll get to that in this video later. But either way, for him to go from never having a podium and kind of being shoved to the outskirts of the top 20 drivers in Formula 1, falling off that list, losing his ride at Renault, to all of a sudden being talked about possibly being a good replacement for Alex Albon at Red Bull, it just speaks volumes about how good those 3 weekends were for him and those 2 Grand Prix. Had Mercedes decided to put him into their car, which was also a possibility at one point, we could really be talking about this guy having one of the biggest turnarounds in an F1 career we've ever seen. They do decide to go a different route in that case, and he has once again kind of fallen to the back burner, but can this guy still figure out a way to get himself into Formula 1 in a year or two? Might be interesting to see. Either way, it was such a fantastic story. I loved every race he was in. I'm putting him at 14th because it was great, and he has a lot more points than people on this side of the board. Hulkenberg, maybe we'll see you next year. All right, coming in at 13th for me is Alex Albon. One of the hardest guys to put on this board because point-wise, stat line-wise, you want to put him further up the board, right? But expectation-wise and the reality of his situation, he should probably even be further back. So I'm putting him at 13th. Alex Albon finishes the year on 105 points. His best finish is a 3rd, which he manages to do twice, gets on the podium twice. I've never seen a driver have such a somber first podium as Alex Albon. It was almost like a huge weight off his back. And then his second podium, it almost didn't look like he enjoyed because he was so far behind his teammate who in that situation. So it's great that they had a double podium. That's what Red Bull hired him to do, but it's just not enough, right? He just didn't do enough to get it done. On top of that, his end of the year, his last 4 races actually are not terrible when you look at it. If that was the type of results we were seeing all season long from Alex Albon, I think that we would not even be questioning someone like Nico Hulkenberg taking his ride. That said, it just felt like it wasn't enough. He does not beat Max Verstappen a single weekend that both drivers took a checkered flag. It's a stat I was reading earlier today. He consistently was off the pace of Verstappen in qualifying, and race Sundays, he was frequently 14 to 28 seconds behind his teammate. And you look at some other races, like the one that Sergio Perez won, and Alex Albon has a better qualifying. If he has a better qualifying in that race and just has the pace that Max has, he probably wins that race with ease. But instead, he finishes 6th. So, still waiting for a decision on what's going to happen there. And I'll tell you what, if Alex Albon is in that Red Bull next year, the amount of backing and faith they have in him is way more than any of us have actually predicted or could foresee, because there just seems like there's so many other better options to be in that car at this point. If it were me, I would have put Alex Albon in the AlphaTauri for another year and have a true competition between him and Gasly and see where they're really at. And I would take either Hulkenberg or Perez and put him in that car. At this point, I would honestly take Checo, which I'll bring up again later in this video. But if Alex Albon stays in that car next year, I will be very surprised. And I just hope for him that if he does, it's a fantastic season. And I think he's going to need to win, right? He's going to have to win if he stays there next year. But we'll find out. I assume that we're going to hear an announcement on that in the next week or two. I know some channels have it been, every day they're updating about it. I think they're going to take their time. They probably already have a decision, but they're not going to let us know until they feel like it. So we'll see. And why not stay out of the news cycle for a little while if you're Red Bull. All right, 12th place, Esteban Ocon for Renault. Ocon had a really, for me, not a great start to the year. He looked way off of Daniel Ricciardo. But I felt like he kept getting better all season, and that's why I have him up to 12th. And my prediction for Esteban Ocon, he's going to be much better next season. And I think he's going to be where he was towards the end of the season, finishing second, not second every week, but I think he'll have a chance at a few podiums next year. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's running right around the same, maybe a little bit better than Fernando Alonso to begin the season next year. His issue is he didn't race in F1 last year, right? And he was a reserve driver coming into a new team with Renault, and I really liked the progress. If I'm a team owner or a team engineer and I'm looking at drivers and them heading the right direction and figuring it out with the team, he did exactly what I think you need him to do. Yeah, you would love for him to have come in a bit as fast as Ricciardo right away, but that's not the reality of Formula One 90% of the time. And I was watching Ocon all season, and I mentioned it a lot in my power rankings about how I felt he was taking those necessary steps every week. And I think it paid off towards the end as he gets his first career podium. So I think Esteban Ocon is going to be just fine. And I think he's going to be the leader and long-term driver at Renault for a long time, unless he has some insanely bad season. But I think it's just going to keep getting better now that he's there. And I think they're going to commit to him a long time at Alpine Racing next year. And I'm interested. Let me know in the comments if you're going to call it Alpine or Alpine, because I heard that one a few times. But anyway, Esteban Ocon at 12. All right, 75 points in a racing point is not enough, which is why Lance Stroll falls to 11th. And he's an interesting driver this year for me. On this board, you'll see that I have the most improved driver, and in the first half of the season, it would have been Lance Stroll. I would have absolutely had him there. He was 4th in the driver standings at one point and had a fantastic start to the season. Lance Stroll's issue was that he needs to figure out how to finish races. He had 5 retirements this season. A lot of them were crashes, and a lot of them were his fault. So, good and bad. It was right. We saw both sides of Lance Stroll this year. He took tremendous strides forward, finishes on the podium a couple of times, but you also feel with a little more experience and a little bit more talent, he would have done a lot more with that car. And if you need proof of that, just look at Sergio Perez. But either way, people give him such a hard time. He's still super young, and he's going to keep getting better. He absolutely proved his worth in Formula One for me this year. I don't care what anyone wants to say about him being a terrible driver and only there for his daddy's money. That's not the case at all. His career leading in the Formula One proves that, in my opinion. And this season, in good equipment, he showed what he can do. He just had way too many retirements this year. He needs to clean up some of those careless mistakes that are happening. He does that. In a year or two, watch out. He'll be a very, very strong competitor on the grid. So for me, I think 11th place, he would have been way further up the board. Just the second half of the season just crushed him. I mean, everything that could go wrong did go wrong for him. And when that's the case, good drivers minimize or eliminate mistakes. Younger drivers who are still learning, like Lance Stroll, just add to that pain. And I felt like that's kind of what happened to him here. So interesting to see what he does with Vettel as his partner next year, a championship driver coming in. So someone that maybe he can learn from. But he's also got to be careful because he doesn't want to get blown away. And it has to be said, if Sergio Perez doesn't miss 2 races this year, that gap is huge. So, and that might get worse with Vettel. So we'll see. But either way, 11th place, not a bad year for Lance Stroll. All right, coming in number 10 for me, my McLaren driver, my theoretically favorite driver on the track. I can't pick a favorite. I really wanted to go into this year pick Lando Norris, but I just like all of them so much. I love Pierre Gasly, and by the end of the year I was saying Sergio. But as a McLaren fan, obviously Lando Norris has got to be one of my guys. And I do love Lando. Lando had a fantastic start to the season. And then I just miserable middle part and then kind of rebounded a little bit at the end. Just not enough to where I wanted to see him. 97 points. McLaren finishes 3rd in the Constructors, which is fantastic. Great stuff. But I felt like that was more Carlos Sainz towards the end of the season. Best finish at 3rd, but that was the first race of the year and it kept getting kind of worse for him after that. He does manage to keep his car on the track, so retirement only one time, but I'm looking for Lando Norris to take a bigger step next year. I think McLaren has a chance of being a very, very good team next year. I think they're still going to be better than Ferrari, and they're going to have a huge battle from Racing Point and Alpine Racing next year. And Renault's getting better. That battle for 6th through 3rd in the Constructors is going to be really tight again next year. And for McLaren to repeat another 3rd, Norris is going to have to be a little bit better than he was this year. He's got the talent to do it, and if he can continue that consistency that he showed at the beginning of the season, they'll be just fine. I just felt like he had a really bad middle of the year, and he needs to clean that up a little bit. But either way, obviously a huge talent and a huge future star in the sport, if he's not already. So Lando Norris, 10th place. All right, coming in the top 10 at 9th with just 3 points, George Russell. And why not? George Russell had a really, really good year. He consistently got out of Q1 in qualifying and out of Williams. He out-qualified his teammate at Williams every single week. And he came darn near close doing that to Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes. Obviously, he's way up here because of his 1 week in Mercedes. He showed absolute world-class driving ability in that entire weekend. And he's the only person on this planet that could have made the entire F1 world be rooting for Mercedes to win another week. Not that we have anything against Mercedes by any means, but most weeks you want anyone but Mercedes because they win every single week. That week was like we were devastated they didn't win. George Russell, though, made absolutely no mistakes that entire weekend. Flawless drive, gets by Valtteri Bottas multiple times in that race, leaves him in his dust, has a huge comeback before losing his tire again that takes him out for a second time in that race. Just absolutely Lewis Hamilton type drive from George Russell and showing that a Hamilton-Russell lineup would be insane to watch. Not sure we're ever going to get it, but George Russell, his future is extremely bright and he is definitely the future of that team. And he really made people question Valtteri Bottas, unfortunately for Bottas. And for me, George Russell, 9th place. It's almost painful that we have to watch him in a Williams for a whole nother year. Hopefully Williams is a lot more improved next year, but they're not going to be that much more improved, let's be honest. But I know everyone wants it. You just wish Mercedes could have a 3rd car next year with George Russell in there, but I don't want to see Valtteri Bottas lose his ride either. I think that he's a really good driver, but I just really want to see Russell in that car, especially against Hamilton at this point. All right, speaking of Valtteri Bottas, we go number 9, 3 points, to number 8. It was 223 points for Valtteri Bottas, 2 race wins, and a pretty terrible season, right? So you got to look at Valtteri Bottas and say this is a missed opportunity. And it wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a huge shadow of doubt over his place at Mercedes all season long. And deservingly so, maybe. That's up for you to decide as the viewers of Formula One and of this channel. Obviously, my opinion on it is I really feel like Valtteri Bottas is a good driver, but I just don't know that he's a great driver after what I saw this year. He starts off this season with the big win. Lewis Hamilton has one of his only 2 races that he doesn't finish on a podium. It's a great momentum builder, and you just want to see Bottas just take off and really bring the fight to Lewis Hamilton. And instead he just flops after that. Then rebounds middle of the season, gets a second win of the year, starts really challenging Lewis Hamilton in those qualifying sessions, out qualifying him for a lot of races, but he just kept getting beat off of pole constantly and constantly outraced on Sunday by Lewis Hamilton. Really made a mockery of him all season long on Sundays and just totally outdrove him, out-strategied him, and just looked like a world-class driver versus an okay driver. So now you get Valtteri Bottas against George Russell, and the same thing happens. George Russell does the exact same thing to Valtteri Bottas, gets around him right away, and really makes it look easy. So I think Bottas is a guy probably with the second most to prove of anyone on the grid behind Alex Albon. Valtteri Bottas will have a ride in Formula One next year with Mercedes, no problem. He will be there. The year after that, I think he'll still have a ride somewhere. It will not be with Mercedes. Maybe it's a Williams. I think that could be a possibility if Williams gets to like a more midfield. But he's going to be questioned forever of whether or not he was ever a world-class driver or really deserving of that second seat at Mercedes, because they really didn't show it this year, in my opinion, which is why I have him all the way down 8th. So a really big missed opportunity in 2020, and he had a ton of bad luck this year, I understand, but good drivers make their own luck in the end, and Lewis Hamilton finished a race on 3 tires and still won it this year. So I know a lot of people want to give him a hard time, but that's bad luck, and he made the most of it. And even when Hamilton had crazy things happen, he raced his way up to 7th. That was his worst finish of the entire season, was a 7th. So you look at that versus what Valtteri Bottas did, it just really was night and day for me. And honestly, it's maybe a bigger gap than what we saw between Verstappen and Albon. Maybe not, but both those drivers as number 2s really had bad seasons, in my opinion. Moving on. All right, I had to change batteries on my camera there. Coming in 7th place, Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. He has a very good year for Ferrari in what was a very bad Ferrari. I really felt that he showed his talent and what Ferrari signed on to when they signed him to that team. That car was bad all year, and unlike Sebastian Vettel, who kind of phoned it in most of the season, knowing that he wasn't going to be in that team next year, Leclerc constantly impressed me with his ability to get more out of that race car. Gets a couple podiums on the season, finishes 2nd in a race, was constantly up there at times where it seemed like they shouldn't have any reason or excuse to be up there. He finds a way to get that car in there. Has some bad races as well, don't get me wrong. He's still a young driver that makes some moves that maybe, I'm going to question a little bit. Gets into contact with Checo in the race that Checo winds up winning, of course, but he just made some moves there that I didn't like throughout the season every once in a while, but nothing more than just a young driver making his way in Formula One. Either way, he totally impressed me this season, and you give him a fast Ferrari, and this guy's going to be winning week in and week out and be doing what Ferrari did 2 or 3 years ago with Vettel and Raikkonen, where they were constantly in the top 3 battling Mercedes and kind of making Red Bull be that 3rd team. So interesting to see. He's got to wait probably 2 years. I think Ferrari will be better next year, but not incredibly better. So I expect more of the same from Leclerc next year. But 2 years from now, I could see him back on the podium consistently and winning races in that Ferrari. So a solid season with what he was given, and that's why I have him all the way up in 7th. The fact that he got that much out of this Ferrari, I think speaks volumes about his character and his ability as a race car driver. All right, with 105 points, the other McLaren driver, Carlos Sainz, and I just want to say this as a McLaren fan, I loved the video saying goodbye to Carlos. I think it speaks volumes of what he meant to that team and the progress that him and that team made there. I think that when he signed on for Ferrari, it was a dream move that totally made sense at the time. Ferrari being the top team that they are, the most historic team in Formula One history. Who wouldn't want to sign on for that? Obviously, the way things have played out this season and look like they might be next season, he might regret that decision a little bit. I don't think he'll be scapegoated or anything like that if the team is struggling next year. I think there'll be a lot more positivity there. That's a really good lineup of Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. Ferrari just needs to be patient and understand where they are next year, and then really see where they're at in 2022 with a new and faster race car that we'll assume. For this season, Carlos Sainz had a season where he couldn't get off the ground in the beginning of the season. He would have a good race, then a retirement, then a good race, then a retirement. But at the end of the season, he really put together a strong showing through the last 5, 6, 7 Grand Prix. Constantly up there, constantly battling for podiums, 4th, 5th, 6th. He was in the conversation race after race after race. But it wasn't just that. He made fantastic moves. In every single race, he had some fantastic overtakes. And he really brought that McLaren to another level. And he helped pick up his teammate doing so. Because I felt like when he started turning it around and putting in some solid performances, eventually Lando Norris started coming with him there, and he kind of led the way. So I fully credit Carlos Sainz for that. Best finish of the year was the 2nd place. 2 retirements overall in the end. He also misses a race where he had a undisclosed illness, I think it was. It might have been COVID in the end. I don't remember if they actually confirmed that or not. So some things that did derail him in the middle of this season, but overall I thought he had a really good year, a really solid performance. I think he probably takes a little bit of a step back in the Ferrari next year. It's a new team and a slow Ferrari. I think it's going to be difficult for him. I don't think the pressure will be there, so in some ways maybe it's a blessing. You can get used to the team next year and get ready for 2022 when they might have a possibility of a championship car again. Whereas if he had gone to Ferrari 2 years ago, the pressure to win would have been there immediately. So that's not what a driver wants to hear, though. I think he would have preferred the pressure and the faster car. Either way, it is what it is. The chips have fallen where they fell, and Carlos Sainz will have a successful career at Ferrari, I'm sure. I'm sad to see him go from McLaren, but a good year this year. All right, 119 points for Daniel Ricciardo, who single-handedly, it felt like, took Renault and picked them up off the ground and brought them to being a really respectable team again. A team that has struggled the last couple of years. His first season with Renault did not go well at all, in my opinion. And I think that led him to leave for McLaren for next season. Again, another one of those decisions that at the time made total sense. And then after the season he had with Renault, it seems like a completely lateral move. I don't think he would have been better or worse doing anything. I like to think that McLaren's going to take a huge step forward with Ricciardo behind the wheel. As a McLaren fan, I'm super excited to have him aboard. That said, things were clicking really well with Renault at the end of the season for him. And you kind of wonder if maybe they were able to take another step, like a Racing Point step next year to maybe even battle for a win. I think it would have been likely had he stayed. Fernando Alonso is obviously more than capable of getting the job done there. And like I said, Ocon's going to keep getting better. But I'm betting that if this season had happened before, even if the season had started before the chips started falling and silly season started, he might have stayed with Renault a little bit longer. But either way, it is what it is, and Ricciardo will be with McLaren next year. Obviously, he has his 2 podiums this year, so he has a 3rd place twice. 1 retirement is fantastic for him. Looking at my notes because I can't remember all the stuff off the top of my head. But a really good season for Daniel Ricciardo. The last couple of races, especially the last one, Renault was a little off their game from where they were, kind of in that middle to the end part of the season where they really picked it up. But either way, fantastic shot for him. He gets the double podiums, gets Renault back on there, and that carries over to Esteban Ocon. And in my opinion, it leaves Ocon in a fantastic position. And a lot of that was built by Daniel Ricciardo showing how you lead a team properly. And I thought that was so interesting with Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo. Their relationship with their teams was so different than Sebastian Vettel. And obviously it makes all the sense in the world when they made the decision to leave versus someone like Sebastian Vettel who was asked to leave, or more accurately, be told he was not going to be staying. So just goes to show what you can do. But I was very impressed with Daniel Ricciardo all season long and how he handled his time at Renault with the 1 year he had left. Very, very solid performances week in and week out. All right, finishing with 75 points. I mean, for many people, probably the driver of the year. For me, just a fantastic story all year. Pierre Gasly gets demoted by Red Bull last year in dramatic fashion It looks like his career is about to peter out and be over before it ever really gets off the ground. And this man has one of the best turnarounds we've ever seen in Formula One history. Totally takes the F1 world by storm. Has fantastic races all season long. AlphaTauri looks fantastic. He looks like a totally different race car driver than he did a year ago. Booming with confidence. And everyone just has to love Pierre Gasly. We all wanted to give him a hug a year ago in 2019. Just because we felt so bad for him, and then we all really wanted to give him a hug in 2020 just because we felt so happy for him. So for me, this is what I'm looking forward to watching the most in Drive to Survive. I think it's going to be the heartwarming story of the entire documentary for season 3 when it comes out. Pierre Gasly is fantastic. He gets the big win at the Italian Grand Prix. For me, that's the win of the year. Checo's was fantastic, except that we were all just so devastated for George Russell. It was kind of hard to fully love it. I was super happy for Sergio Perez, don't get me wrong, but like all of us wanted George Russell to win that race, I think, for the majority of it until we realized Checo had a chance and it played out the way it did. Pierre Gasly, though, we were all just cheering him on like crazy. I remember watching the French broadcast of him coming over the line, what that meant to all of France, and just everyone was feeling that for Pierre Gasly. One of the great moments of the entire season. Fantastic all year. No one can say anything bad about him the entire season long. So 4th place for him. If you're Alex Albon, that's not what you want to hear. If you're Red Bull, honestly, you either look like geniuses or idiots, and it's really hard to see that fine line between the two. And depending on who you ask, they're either geniuses or they're idiots. And there's really no way of knowing. Christian Horner's defense of Albon makes me feel like it's more towards the idiot side when it comes to the way they handled Pierre Gasly. But maybe they're geniuses, because Pierre Gasly is the number 1 driver at AlphaTauri now and looks really, really good. And if that team keeps getting better and really does become a Red Bull sister team at some point, he could win a lot more races down the road. So that said, it's kind of interesting that, and I shouldn't go into this video because it'll drag on forever if it hasn't already. Pierre Gasly is a really interesting case study because do you stay with AlphaTauri long term, or do you maybe jump ship when Alonso retires and you head over to the French team? It'd be very interesting to see what's going to happen there long term. But either way, Pierre Gasly, great season. I won't drag on anymore about that. 125 points for a driver who missed 2 Grand Prix this season out with the COVID virus. Sergio Perez gets a absolutely famous win at the expense of George Russell's misery, but either way, Checo gets the job done. He was fantastic all season long in that car. Scoring points left and right, constantly up in the top 5, constantly making great passes, and his win has got to be one of the best of the season. Pierre Gasly's, I think, meant the most to me is from an emotional standpoint, but as far as being impressive, the 2 that stick out to my head, most impressive wins of the year, were Sergio Perez coming from dead last after lap 1 of cars that were still running, so 18th, all the way up to 1st, marching through the entire field of Formula One caliber race car drivers to score his first ever victory in a team that told him that they're not going to keep him because they signed Sebastian Vettel, and having no idea what his future is, and we still don't know what his future is. Maybe he does, but we don't as fans, and for him to score that win is just super awesome. Even after that team said they were going in a different direction, you could tell how much that team really meant to him, and the celebrations afterwards of him winning that race was extremely heartwarming and fantastic. I'm going to say it here again. If Sergio Perez is not in Formula One in 2021, it's an absolute shame because I absolutely love that driver. He's so much fun to watch drive a race car. He's totally deserving of it. He had such a fantastic season. Red Bull, I don't want to say goodbye to Alex Albon either, but Checo's your man. You should put him in that car. Anyway, moving on. Number 2 is Max Verstappen, and Max Verstappen is one of the best drivers in Formula One, maybe the best driver in Formula One. Red Bull finally gets it figured out, and he has a true Max Verstappen Red Bull type day of what they were hoping to do all season long. Out-qualifies the Mercedes, leads every single lap, and just puts in a clinical showing to win the race. He ultimately only finishes the season with 2 wins because Mercedes were really just that insane, but maybe some hope for Red Bull moving forward. I do think that it really points out the importance, though, of that second seat at Red Bull, because that last race of the year, Alex Albon was in fourth, putting pressure on, to a certain extent, the other two Mercedes drivers, and that mattered because it changed pitch strategy. And if they could have been doing that all year long, things might have been different. Not a lot different. I think we are witnessing the fastest Mercedes and Formula One race cars in history, but they might have been able to snag another win or two. In the end, though, Verstappen, every time he was in that car, he's figuring out how to drive a car that apparently is a very difficult car to drive, as we've seen from Gasly and Albon in it. He's constantly putting pressure on two Mercedes cars that are theoretically much faster than his Red Bull, and he's still figuring out how to compete with those two drivers. He's a world-class talent and a future champion of the sport, no doubt in my mind about that one. He finishes with 2 wins, though, so he does tie one of the Mercedes drivers on wins. I also think it's important he gets that second win, because then you could really have an argument about Pierre Gasly. It looked like he was going to finish this season with the same amount of wins as Max Verstappen. That would have been really something else. But either way, I hope Red Bull takes that next step next year. I think they're close. I think they're super close. They think they're super close. But you're not going to get it done if you have Albon running around in 12th in half your Grand Prix. So we'll see what happens for Max and Red Bull moving forward. Number 2 on the list, though, no doubt. Was there any doubt that he was going to be number 2? And he should be number 1 in a year or two. Number 1 is Lewis Hamilton. And I actually have to just read this right off this. 347 points, 11 wins, and guess what? Absolutely no retirements. He misses 1 Grand Prix due to coronavirus. I mean, this is one of the most legendary seasons we've ever seen in Formula One. Yes, the Mercedes was that fast. George Russell was able to come in and dominate a race just like Lewis Hamilton did. But we also saw that you need to be able to beat your teammate, which Russell was able to do too, as well. Lewis Hamilton didn't just beat Valtteri Bottas, he made him look like a bad driver on a lot of weekends. 11 wins, constantly being up front, and he only finishes off the podium 2 times. I'm trying to put it into words to make it sound as impressive as it is, because I don't know that I can actually express words to go into how impressive what Lewis Hamilton has done. He's a 7-time champion now. You can expect a video coming pretty soon about that. But, I mean, he's the best driver on the grid right now. And I know there's people saying talent-wise, maybe Verstappen, maybe someone else. But the most impressive win for me, I said Sergio Perez's march from 18th up to 1st was one of 2. The other one, Lewis Hamilton finished a race for almost an entire lap on 3 tires and still managed to win that Grand Prix and not crash the car, not retire the car, and not, whatever, with a charging Max Verstappen flying up on him. It's one of the most impressive things I've seen someone do in an F1 car this year, and it really can't go without the accolades it deserves. On top of that, the guy's flawless. He makes no mistakes, and he gets in. I feel like he gets in his opponents' heads where they make mistakes constantly, and no more of a case than his own teammate Valtteri Bottas, who made mistake after mistake this season. So Lewis Hamilton, he is the best. I know that he seems to be one of those drivers you either love or you hate, and it was the same thing in NASCAR when Jimmy Johnson won his 7 titles. You either hated him or you loved him, and so many NASCAR fans complained that it was the car, it was Hendrick, it was all this stuff, and of course, the best equipment is going to help you a lot, but Jimmy Johnson was one of the best drivers in NASCAR history, and Lewis Hamilton is one of, if not the best driver in Formula One history. So, you like it or hate it, it is what it is. But those are my 2020 power rankings. Last thing I want to do in this video, driver of the year, most improved, and my biggest flop of the season. And for me, we'll start with the flop. And the biggest flop for me was really torn between Sebastian Vettel and Alex Albon. But I'm going to go with Albon just because I feel like there was a lot of reason as to why Sebastian Vettel had a terrible season. Ferrari was bad, and he knew he was leaving the team. Alex Albon had a career opportunity to stamp his name in Formula One and be as good as Max Verstappen, and instead it looks like there's a very solid chance that he might lose a ride in Formula One altogether and be out of the sport. And when you're in one of the arguably top 4 fastest cars on the grid, that's just not good enough. That's a major flop, and I feel bad for him, but performance needs to matter. He's been given way more time than Pierre Gasly was given. I think it's time to move on from Albon. Most improved driver, Pierre Gasly. So, you put Gasly in that Red Bull, all the pressure on him, and you demote him really quickly. Didn't give him nearly as much time as he gave Albon, and Christian Horner constantly likes to talk about how comparison 12 races to 12 races, Albon was better. I've done a video on this channel about that. That's not true. It is way closer than Horner gives it credit for, and in some ways, Gasly was better. In some ways, Albon was better too, but Christian Horner likes to talk about that all the time. It's not true, but if you want to talk about the most improved driver, it's Pierre Gasly. He goes down to AlphaTauri, gets a race win, has podiumed with that team, and looks really, really good and confident now, whereas Alex Albon, again, looks not that way. So Pierre Gasly, most improved driver, which brings me to the final thing for this video, driver of the year. Driver of the year for me is Checo. It's Sergio Perez, and he might not be in Formula 1 next year. It sounds like he's got some options for 2022, which I hope is true. I really want to see him in that Red Bull at this point. If I haven't made that clear in this video, I don't know how to make that clear. Checo deserves to be in Formula 1. He showed his caliber of driver. You give him a fast car like the Racing Points were this year, and he was battling for podiums week in and week out and winning. So Sergio Perez for me, driver of the season. Obviously, it's easy to go with a Lewis Hamilton, but when I look at someone who just really opened my eyes to saying, hey, this is one of the best drivers in F1, and why doesn't he have a ride? It's Sergio Perez. So Checo, best of the season. That said, I do want to take a quick moment to talk about my channel moving forward. First of all, if you're new and you've lasted the half hour or whatever this video is going to wind up being, thank you, and please hit like and subscribe if you like my content. I do have to make a comment that my videos are not coming out as frequently as I would like moving forward. I'm going to try to change that. I do have a pretty demanding engineering job that has gotten very busy as we have approached the end of the year. It has been more difficult for me to make videos, but I do 100% appreciate the support. The channel is not going anywhere, and as things ease up, I will produce more content. So I will continue to try to do one video a week at least. My ultimate goal is always 3 a week, but as you've seen on this channel the last couple of weeks, that hasn't been the case. New studio lighting, I think, is a little bit better. Let me know if you think the lighting is pretty good. And as always, I appreciate your support. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next video and the next Formula 1 season. See you next time.